President Trump will head to Vietnam next week for his second summit with North Korean dictator Kim Jong Un. The president last met with Kim last year at a summit in Singapore to discuss denuclearization. That has not yet happened. Negotiators are reportedly already in Hanoi preparing for the meeting. On Friday, Mr. Trump said America's relationship with the North was good. He also repeated claims about the status of U.S. relations with North Korea before he was elected president, claims that have been thoroughly debunked.
If I were not elected president, you would have been in a war with North Korea. We now have a situation where the relationships are good, where there's been no nuclear testing, no missiles, no rockets. We got our hostages back. We have many of the remains back and coming back rapidly, the remains of our great warriors from many, many years ago, and the families are so thrilled and so happy. We've had a great relationship. The Singapore was a tremendous success. Only the fake news likes to portray it otherwise. We would have literally been in a war with North Korea, in my opinion, had I not been elected.
Julia Manchester is a reporter for The Hill and joins us now from Washington. So, Julia, what are negotiators from both sides preparing for with this upcoming summit? What do they hope will come from it?
Well, I think on the U.S. side, there's definitely a preparation for trying to get some movement on denuclearization. You know, even though the president says Singapore was successful last year, we haven't seen North Korea actually take further major steps to denuclearize. You know, we have U.S. intelligence saying there is still evidence that there is work on nuclear energy and weapons in North Korea, and Kim hasn't gotten rid of, you know, various weaponry that he essentially said he would in the during the first summit. So I think there is going to be some further work on that. And I think President Trump is going to face a lot of pressure from Democratic lawmakers when he gets back to the U.S. on the status of what happened in the summit. You know, you're already seeing Democrats demanding a full briefing as to what the two discussed during this trip. So I think denuclearization will absolutely be on the table. But, you know, President Trump faces a lot of pressure from his intelligence community as well as Democrats from, quite frankly, a failure to get Kim to do what was essentially demanded last year.
Julia, when you talk about what's on the table, the president said that removing troops from the Korean peninsula is not on the table. Do you think that'll be a sticking point?
It very well could potentially be a sticking point. You know, I think President Trump wants to keep, as well as the U.S. intelligence community, for that matter, wants to keep a U.S. presence in that region. However, I think it's going to be create some problematic issues with North Korea because they obviously want to maintain their sphere of influence in that region. So that could definitely be a tension point between the two sides in this, you know, major goal to get to denuclearization.
President Trump, we know, met with the Chinese officials for continuing trade talks. This is ahead. They've got a March 1st deadline before these tariff increases kick in. I want to play for you what the president had to say on Friday.
We're having very good talks. There's a chance that something very exciting could happen. We're getting a 10% tariff on $200 billion worth of goods. The 10% goes up as of March 1st. It goes to a 25% number. So we'd be getting 25% on $250 billion, and there's about $267 billion that's untariffed, untouched, which we discuss later. But if we can make a deal, we wouldn't have to bother with that discussion.
The president seems confident there, as you heard from that bite. You know, you got Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin even recommending a meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping and President Trump. But are they certain that this deal will actually come to fruition and happen?
There's actually a lot of uncertainty right now between U.S. and Chinese trade officials. You know, we have seen progress over the past couple of months. You know, China promised to essentially import a number of soybeans from the U.S. each year, which would in turn help American farmers, a major part of President Trump's constituency. But yes, there certainly is uncertainty on both sides, and that puts quite a bit of pressure on President Trump essentially going into the 2020 campaign trail. You know, we saw that China was a major part of President Trump's campaign promises and platform in trying to essentially push fair U.S. trade around the world, especially with China. So when President Trump tries to really appeal to that blue-collar manufacturing farming base that is so well connected to Chinese and U.S. businesses with China, that's going to be a major sticking point for him.
You know, the White House is also nominating U.S. Ambassador to Canada, Kelly Knight-Craft, to be the next ambassador to the United Nations. We're already seeing people talking about her climate change comments. Do you think that her nomination is already in trouble at this point?
Well, with the current political climate on the Hill and, I guess, the stark partisanship on the Hill, it definitely could face major roadblocks. I wouldn't necessarily say it's in trouble. However, we've seen that climate change has really been a hot topic on the Hill recently with Green New Deal proposals and other proposals to combat climate change, especially from Democrats. And I think her views and her comments to CBC News on that back in 2017 could kind of prevent a lot of roadblocks for her going forward. She kind of threw out this, well, both sides of the issue are important here, but I could totally see Democrats in a hearing really, present a lot of scientific evidence for her to her in a way to back her into a corner there. And obviously, climate change is a major issue in the United Nations and for the global community. We saw the Trump administration pulled out of the Paris Climate Accords, which didn't exactly improve its standing with many of our allies on the issue, especially in the United Nations. So I could see that playing a major role in her confirmation battle.
And we know the House will vote on a Democratic-led resolution to block the president's national emergency declaration for wall funding. We've seen states suing. How do you think Republicans, are they wary at this point of this declaration? And do you think that this measure will be able to have the votes to overcome a veto?
Well, we've seen that conservatives on the Hill are very much in support of this measure. I think they view this as President Trump essentially trying to get through and commit to his campaign promise, which is essentially a campaign promise to their bases. However, this move could definitely put pressure on senators such as Susan Collins and other moderate Republicans on the Hill who are already wary of this in the first place. So the more pressure it inflicts on moderates like Susan Collins and other moderate Republicans, I would say that really puts into question whether, whether they, have enough votes to get this through. Because if they're able to get those moderate Republicans on their side, then I would say it's pretty close to smooth sailing.
Julie, I've got to ask you, we always talk 2020. I've got to ask you one particular candidate getting a lot of buzz, not for the right reasons, Senator Amy Klobuchar. She's facing these reports of abusing staffers. She's been fighting for name recognition in a very crowded field. I mean, did you read the report about how she didn't get utensils on a plane, so she used her comb to eat a salad? It's just also strange at this point. But when you're fighting for name recognition, I can't imagine these reports are helpful when you're trying to get these primary voters.
No, it's not. It's absolutely not helpful at all, and especially for Amy Klobuchar. She's a senator from Minnesota, from the Midwest, and she's competing with major experienced politicians such as Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden, even though he hasn't officially jumped into the race. So it's not helpful. And I would say that in terms, as a millennial, looking at the work environment, the reported work environment and reports of that are coming out of her office, I think millennials, proper, well-run work environment is something that's very important to us. So as a millennial Democratic voter, I'm not sure how many, I don't think a lot of millennial Democratic voters are going to essentially, be attracted to this, if you will. This could be a major turnoff.
I want to also ask you about 2018 midterms, which still aren't over. In North Carolina's 9th congressional district, they're going to hold a new election after a contractor for Republican Mark Harris's campaign was accused of election fraud. President Trump and other Republicans have long tried to make voter fraud a talking point, which is really different from what actually happened here. Are they responding to this incident at this point?
It seems like Mark Harris is responding. However, it comes months after this situation took place and really began. We saw that there was testimony from his own son essentially saying, I tried to tell my dad that this was an issue. And then we saw Mark Harris flipped, and we saw President Trump immediately come out and, praise Mark Harris's move for calling for a new election. So that's, I guess, a little bit hypocritical on that front. However, speaking of Mark Harris's political future, looking at this, it's hard for me not to see a brand new field of congressional candidates for that 9th congressional district that include Republicans. So Mark Harris's political future with this move, although many people say he eventually did the right thing, his political future could be in question.
Julia Manchester joining us from our Washington Bureau. Julia, thank you very much.
Thank you.